I'm going to start off by introducing the leads of both clubs. My name is Ashley. I am president of Amnesty International.
Everyone, my name is Garrison. I'm the vice president of Amnesty International.
Hello, my name is Bill Mahoney. I'm the populations coordinator.
I'm Claudia. I'm the social media coordinator of Amnesty International.
I'm Kit. I'm the lead for outreach and fundraising for the Remedy Project.
I'm Dimitri. I'm the lead for the campaigns, the Remedy Project.
I'm Ayn, and I'm part of the Remedy Project, and I'm the ARC lead.
Thank you guys so much for coming. And we're going to start with the panelists. There they are.
So yeah, this is a wonderful turnout. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to be here. Thank you again to our panelists for taking the time to be a part of this event. I'm personally very excited to learn from all of your experiences and expertise tonight. So yeah, I guess we'll start with an introduction of you guys. Could each of you introduce yourselves and share a bit about the path that brought you to work on issues related to incarceration? And how do your personal experiences shape how you see the prison system and your approach to challenging it?
I'll just go this way. Yeah.
Oh, you want the longest first? Okay. Hi, folks. My name is David Simpson. I'm co-founder and co-director of the Remedy Project. My part to this began while I was an electrician doing electrical work. Have a family, wife, 2 sons, going about my business. When a childhood friend of mine who was trying to get involved in some illegal activity asked me to pick up someone at the airport for him, and I agreed to because I saw the person get to the airport using my car by someone else. That person could not make it to the airport to pick them up because they had to work, and so they called me and asked me to do them a favor, to do the favor of picking the individual up, and I did. When I arrived at the airport, the ICE agent said, "Hey, this person is expected or suspected of bringing drugs into the United States of America. They told us that you were not a part of it, but you are close friends of these individuals who attempted to do it, and we want you to do a sting and take us to these individuals." I said, based on that information, I knew that my friends couldn't get involved in anything like smuggling drugs, and if they were, they probably were dealing with or messing with folks who were dangerous. So I decided I'm not going to do that, and I said, no, I need a lawyer, I can't help you, and they promised me that they would make me pay, and they did. At trial, they brought someone else who was supposedly involved in a conspiracy to bring drugs, who had real drugs on them, to say that I was the individual that was responsible for her bringing drugs into the United States of America, while the individual who I was actually picking up actually didn't have any drugs at all. What they had was a painkiller called lidocaine, so which means that that individual did not commit a crime in smuggling things into the United States, which means that I did not commit a crime. I'm picking the person up and was not a part of the conspiracy. But yet they had this new individual say that I was responsible, and I ended up with 11 years, 3 months sentence after trial, because I lost at trial because people believed the person who said that I was involved. And so I ended up in prison, and while there, I assisted an individual who had brain cancer. We were playing a game, and that individual had a seizure, and it was terrifying. We got to the officer, there was no medical staff. This happened at 12 o'clock at night, and they said they'll get the person help in the morning. I got up, the individual was still in the bed. I asked what was going on. The officer said, oh, they're coming up to get him. This medical staff came and asked the individual to get up out of bed, to walk down to the infirmary. And 15 minutes later, the individual was back up on the unit. And he was telling me that the doctors told him that because he walked down to the infirmary, whatever medical condition or whatever his seizure was, it didn't matter what had happened to him for the first day at time or how scared he was or anything like that. That none of that mattered because he walked down to the infirmary, so he must be okay, so he can turn around and go back up to the unit. And so when he came back up, he asked me to write a letter for him to his judge. He was going to tell me what to write, and I'll write it for him. And I said, well, you know what? No, I was there. I saw what happened. I was a witness. So I'll just write it from my perspective. You don't have to tell me anything. And that's what I did. I wrote a letter explaining what we witnessed and what happened. His judge got the letter and decided that he would give the prison staff and the prosecutors a scolding because of the way that they were treating this individual with cancer. And next thing you know, things got quiet after that. They gave this guy the treatment he was supposed to get. And after I was sentenced, I was sent to a prison camp. And next thing you know, all of a sudden, I'm being attacked. And when I say attacked, I mean staff is writing me up and providing me with something called incident reports. It's almost like a ticket, right? You run the red light, you get a traffic ticket. In prison, incarcerated persons who do wrong things will get what is called an incident report. And I got a bunch of them at one point in time for having a stick of butter, an apple, 2 slices of bread, and that type of stuff in my locker. And they took away all my privileges for 3 months across the board. And I didn't understand what was going on. I didn't know. I wasn't aware of what was happening. And one individual said to me, hey, man, something must be wrong. Who are you? Why are they treating you like this? Because usually for the type of things they wrote you these incident reports for, they usually throw that stuff out. They just take it and throw it away. They don't write these incident reports. And so that was my first interaction with incident reports. And next thing you know, the guy is telling me, well, you got to go get administrative remedies. You got to go get yourself a BP-8 and a BP-9, and you want to appeal your incident reports and tell them that you find that the punishment is too harsh. And so I went to try to do that, and next thing you know, I'm getting more incident reports, and another 60 to 90 days is taken away because when they gave me the first set of incident reports, I somehow was supposed to know that I was not supposed to go call my wife and let her know that they just took away my time, so I won't be able to use the phone anymore. So they gave me incident reports for that. And that I sent my lawyer email saying, well, you know, I just got some incident reports. They're going to take away the email so we can only communicate by mail. They gave me more time for that. And so this was my first experience with this stuff. And then more things, they piled on more things after coming weeks, accusing me of being places, in unauthorized places when I actually worked there and stuff like that. And I mean, all this is happening in quick time, and in 2 months' time, I'm now in the SHU and being transferred and shipped from Pennsylvania, close to family, all the way to Beaumont, Texas, in Beaumont, Texas, right? And so, yeah, I get there. I ran into the person I now call my mentor, Gary Opala. He was the one who opened my eyes to what was going on to prison culture, the so-called war when it comes to staff against folks who are incarcerated. They just don't like each other and are always going after each other. He explained that stuff to me, and even the broader concept of prison and litigation and stuff. I worked with him as his paralegal, and he also taught me the administrative remedy process on how to defend myself from such things happening to me again. And I got really good at it, with defending myself. And others saw that, and then they started coming to ask me to help them out. And I started doing that, and I got really known for these things. But what happened, what set me apart from everybody else, was while I was doing these things, I realized that there was a lot of retaliation and a lot of oppression against that system, which we are supposed to use to raise any issue that we have in prison to make it legitimate. And I realized that they applied a lot of pressure to make sure that we did not make these things get to the top level where they're supposed to be. So make sure that they were not exhausted. And I studied the system. I studied the way they think. I studied the way incarcerated people think and the process. And I started developing ways and tactics to get around the abuse and the hindrances that staff would put in to make things not work. And I got really good at it and became one of the first individuals to almost everything that I did remedy-wise got exhausted. And so I became well known and respected by both incarcerated and staff members for for that reason. And that was a great thing. I saved a lot of lives, a lot of headache. I saved people a lot of trauma and so on with those talents. And while exiting prison, I realized that I most likely will be leaving this great talent behind. But I ran into Anna, Sugrue, and some other students. Another one is here. Colin Adams is here. He's one of the first people we recruited, at the Remedy Project. And I explained and give them, what it is that I used to do in prison. And they were excited. And what excited me about them was that I realized that you had a very sincere passion about justice reform, prison abolition, and making change. And I was retaliated again while at the halfway house doing what it is I do. And Anna got to experience that. And it was at that time that it all started coming together in my head that, hey, what would be great is if outsiders could help folks with the remedy process and keep an eye on the system and the individuals who are in the prison who are doing the hindrance and stuff. And if I could train them to do remedy process on behalf of folks who are incarcerated and develop a organization to continue to work continuously to protect these folks, and if it contain mass amongst of students who to me are the most important powerful voices in our nation. Once you are right about what you're talking about, let me add that, because if you're wrong, they're just going to say, they're just students, let's not pay them any mind. But when you're right, they pay attention, and they move mountains for you most of the time. So I decided, to communicate that with Anna and others, and they bought into the mission, and we started off as the Student Justice League, and then they got tired of me and that, and then it became the Remedy Project, and we worked through the process. We proved concept of being able to get stuff in and out from people in prison and back and forth, and today you have a powerful, growing organization called the Remedy Project, which is doing great work, saving lives and healing, people and making things better for folks across this nation in federal prisons, and hopefully one day across the nation in all the states and every other part of the community. There was a second part to your question.
Sure, I think you touched on it, but it was about how, your personal experiences shaped how you saw the prison system.
How I saw the prison system. Well, very, very ignorant. I did not grow up in the United States of America. I grew up in Trinidad and Tobago, even though I was born here. And when I got here, I experienced a lot of profiling, police profiling, while I had long dreads. Island guy, I had the car with the rims dropped low and the lights and the music, and I would always be pulled over, and I never understood it. I tell you, I must have gotten over 100 tickets from the time I started driving to the time I was arrested for that crime, and I never knew or understood why. I just felt like police just didn't like me or was targeting me. I didn't have any concept of the fact that it was racial profiling or anything like that. I learned about all of that stuff while incarcerated. That's when my eyes were really opened. One of my good friends got arrested, and he was in prison. It wasn't a big deal to me. You know what I'm saying? I really did. You couldn't tell me about mass incarceration or prisons. I probably wouldn't have paid you any attention. Like most people, I was just living my life and didn't really care much until I ended up in prison and saw what was happening to individuals in prison. And I saw a lot of lives destroyed. I still see it today. Students of the Remedy Project witness a lot of pain and destruction every day in the prison system, and that's what we're pushing back against. And so I see the prison system as one of the worst and the most dangerous crisis in this country today. We could argue and debate about that, but I think that's what it is. It destroys people physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually daily. Those incarcerated and their family members. It is a horrible thing that we do, this modern day slavery. That's how I see it. That's how I witness it. And it needs to stop. It needs to change. We need to make a difference.
Thank you, David.
He's always a hard act to follow. I'm going to keep my story a little bit brief and begin with I didn't have any experience with policing or incarceration growing up, and it is not a system that I think I knew very much about before college. In the background of my childhood, things that shaped me into being someone who was at least a little bit paying attention to these things, and I entered college. I went to Barnard. I started in 2016. And I started college with just the sense of, like, my career is going to be dedicated to making the world better in some way. And that was like a value set that I had from my childhood, from lots of different inputs. I think mainly my parents, who were both, they met in getting PhDs in history and academia, and then they studied the 20th century American history, studied social movements, and so I think that had to have been really ingrained somewhere in me growing up, that value of being critical of the world around me and thinking about institutions and the way that they change, the way that we can impact them. But I started college as a neuroscience major, which was funny. I think I was trying to rebel against my parents. I was like, I can't do history. Like, I'm not going to be in the social sciences. I'm not going to be in the humanities. I'm going to be a neuroscience major. I love the brain. I love, and I lasted like a semester and a half. I very quickly got tired of that. I really hated being in classes where I was just like, I couldn't talk to anyone and like engage and critically in the things that we were discussing, where I just had to like memorize stuff and take tests. Just didn't work with me. And of course I ended up majoring in urban studies and sociology. And I think they're thinking about kind of historically also what the backdrop was. I mean, in 2012, when I was a freshman in high school, was the first big Black Lives Matter uprising. So there was, I think, just like in the zeitgeist, there was a increasing awareness about racial justice and the criminal justice system that definitely was shaping what was happening on campus when I was in college. It was also the first Trump presidency, was 2016 to 2020. So that was also, like, I think a real backdrop of my college years. But I didn't really think about my career as being engaged in criminal justice reform until my sophomore year. I sort of stumbled into an internship, sort of by happenstance, with this thing called the Police Reform Organizing Project, which is an organization here in New York that is, I mean, we're a pretty informal organization in some ways. This was like far, far more informal than we are, in a way that I think it gives me some context for how far we've come. But it was just this guy named Bob who was retired from. He had a really amazing career doing stuff related to prison reform, but this was like his retirement project, and he just got a bunch of like college student interns that would go to his office, which was his apartment, and would work with him on doing what he was trying to do is something I think really important, which was tracking the way, trying to track discriminatory policing practices in New York. And they were doing that by going to court, by going to misdemeanor arraignments. So if your arraignment is the first thing that happens after you're arrested. If you're arrested and the state wants to charge you with a crime, the first thing that happens is you go to arraignments. It's like you see a judge, and the judge will assign charges. We are going to misdemeanor arraignments, which is the misdemeanor felony. It's like lower level crimes, and so it was a way where we could sit in court and literally watch who had been arrested the day before and for what. And that was an incredibly eye-opening experience for me, because I was sitting there watching like entirely working class people of color in New York routinely getting arrested and having their lives turned upside down for lack of a better word, for bullshit, for like things that were not crimes, are not affecting anyone. They were just like, in most cases, racially profiled, pulled aside, and given a ticket for whatever the cop could come up with. Like there was a guy who was a florist who was arrested for possessing a weapon, and it was the knife that he had in his bag to cut flowers. Like things like this that were just like, whoa. And after that, I started taking classes that at Columbia and at Barnard that were about the criminal justice system, and just fell down a rabbit hole learning about this system. And I think I began to see it as I progressed academically. As in urban studies, I was learning about urban inequality, and it felt like you're learning about a lot of different systems that maintain inequality, and it really felt like the criminal justice system was like the crux in the middle. It was like literally the thing that was enforcing all of the bad things happening in other institutions. And I was like, if I'm gonna have a career trying to fix the world in some way, like this is the system that I want to get to know and that I want to transform. And it was through all that process that I ended up doing things with something called the Columbia Center for Justice. And David had just, like he was saying, had just gotten out of prison, and was taking courses at Columbia, and we took a class together because I was involved in a lot of this stuff going on campus. And we just like became pals. I think we just like sat next to each other the first day of class. This is like all of 2018. It was a while ago now. I've known this guy a long time. We just like would chit chat after class, and began to talk about some of these sort of political things. But then halfway through the semester, David stopped showing up to class, and a class passed, another class passed, another class passed. We're like, where's David? The professor made some calls and found out that he had been reincarcerated. He'd been living in a halfway house, which is exactly what it sounds like, and had been reincarcerated in retaliation. We kind of figured out for the advocacy work that he had been doing and that we still do with the Remedy Project. And this was another, I think, really eye-opening experience for me, because at that point I read so many books and taken classes about the prison system, but knowing someone personally who was in prison and like calling David on the phone every week and hearing like the sound of prison behind him, like it was just like a really another level of experience that has, I think, really further invested me in what I'm still continuing to do. And it was in those conversations that David started to teach me about the administrative remedy process, and was trying to get my help to appeal the disciplinary decision, like completely illegal, like disciplinary decision that got him reincarcerated to begin with. And that, I think, is really where the idea for the organization was born, where David was like, I have this skill that I don't want to leave behind, and he learned the brutal way that he couldn't do it by himself, right? He needed people to do it with him who who weren't directly vulnerable to the retaliation of the state, who could just get picked up off the street and thrown back in federal prison. And that was me. And that was I came back to campus and started, I had started a club called the Barnard Prison Abolition Collective, where we'd all sit around and be like, we love abolition, and we didn't really do anything. And so I was like, David, come speak to our club. Colin was there at one of our first club meetings. And we just recruited some students who wanted to learn more from David, and then just kind of the ball kept rolling. We had students who wanted to do this, and we were like, well, if we want to actually help people, we're going to need a mailbox, we're going to need a phone number, we're going to need an office, we're going to need staff, we're going to need money, and we're still sort of falling down that rabbit hole 5 years later. So, yeah, that's my story.
Thank you, Anna.
Yeah.
Professor Ross.
Yeah, thank you for telling us more about the Remedy Project. It's really, really terrific work and very useful. And thank you, Kit and others, for putting this together. I've been arrested several times, most recently at the request of NYU, my own employer, for lawful, nonviolent protest. But I've never spent more than 24 hours in a holding cell over those arrests. I do, however, spend a lot of time in prison as an educator, and this is part of our prison education program. You've all heard of NYU Abu Dhabi and NYU Shanghai. You probably haven't heard of NYU Wallkill. It doesn't have that official name. It's not part of the Global Network University, but it is an upstate men's penitentiary where NYU offers a degree. Now we have a 4-year BA degree that's offered there. And I was one of the founders of the program. We've been up and running for, I don't know, maybe 8 or 9 years now. But actually, the original catalyst was an undergraduate in my department who wrote his senior thesis about prison education. And it won the Boardman Prize, which is the social science prize here at NYU and College of Arts and Science. And the chair of the department at the time and myself, we thought, maybe we should look into this. Maybe we should have a prison education program at NYU. So we commissioned him over the course of the summer to research the feasibility of finding a location that would be, within commuting distance of NYU. And we looked in New Jersey, we looked in downstate New York, and we eventually found this location, Wallkill. It's about 2 hours north of here. And I mentioned that just to encourage you to think about how your own research here can have those kinds of consequences if they're channeled and amplified and pushed in the right direction. Wallkill actually was founded in the 1930s as a kind of New Deal, showpiece for education being at the heart of prison reform. And it's designed, architecturally, it's designed the collegiate Gothic style, like a lot of small liberal arts colleges. In the countryside, if you were just driving past, you might think, oh, that's a college. You saw your way past the barbed wire. And so it's always had that kind of experimental purpose. And we revived that experimental purpose and the educational function of it by bringing the program there. And after a while, we spun off a research wing of it. Jacob will speak more about that. We work in conjunction with our formerly incarcerated students, produce research, and we have a long list of publications. This is the most recent one, Abolition Labor, The Fight to End Prison Slavery, and it was published last year. And so my third relationship after educator, researcher, my third relationship to the carceral system is as an advocate or an activist. And growing out of the work we did around this book, I'm a member of 13th Forward, which is a New York State coalition that is pushing for the abolition of slavery without exception in New York State. It's one of a number of coalitions around the country that's trying to pass constitutional amendments, state constitutional amendments, to end the exception clause in the 13th Amendment, which some of you may know, is the clause which authorizes involuntary servitude and slavery behind bars. To this day, we think slavery was abolished more than 160 years ago. It was not. Certainly not for those who are convicted of crimes. And so that's my third relationship to the system, and obviously we can talk more about our work. But Jake.
The way I kind of started off in the criminal justice world was just through kind of a folk wisdom I kind of built growing up in small town Texas. Grew up with a black family, and we just kind of knew how to be treated by the police, what to expect, kind of what that relationship would be like. So I'd always had in the back of my mind just what my relationship to the criminal justice system could be. And it wasn't until I was about I want to say 12, 13 that I started to take an academic route with that. I'd always been a nerd. I always loved school. So I thought, one way to kind of understand something that I don't really understand in this world, relationship between black folks and police, or why there's so many black folks locked up, or things like that. One way to understand that was through studying it. So I started reading a lot. I started dedicating myself to an academic lens of understanding the history behind this, why the world works the way it does, particularly in regards to criminal justice, and ultimately how I fit into that picture. And I kind of studied that through college, did work in the legal area, policy area. None of it really felt like what I should be doing. And then around 2019, 2020, I had a friend get locked up, and by a variety of circumstances, I became his primary caretaker. I had folks in my family get locked up before, but this was the first time I had kind of been asked to be the main support person involved with that. And for those that don't know or have never experienced kind of that relationship with someone who's locked up, a lot of times it feels like you're doing that time together. So this was, for me, one of the first times I've really experienced being connected to prison life in this way. It was not only emotionally taxing. I mean, just like you said, you're hearing the sounds of a prison on a phone call every day. You're hearing the horrible things that were done to them, written in letters. When you go on the visits, you experience the searches, you experience getting your visit terminated. You have to pay all the costs along the way to make that visit happen. And it's emotionally intensive, it's also financially intensive as well, right? And so by this point, I dedicated myself to doing a PhD, moved to New York, where my friend was incarcerated. He was at Sing Sing, now he's at Elmira, so visiting is a different situation now. But I started to seriously consider what research and kind of an academic form of advocacy could be done to actually understand what people who are supporting folks inside also go through. This is one misconception a lot of folks have about prison. We just send people away to someplace far, far away, and that's it. That's not it, right? There's these ripple effects that happen that go back through their families, through their communities, and people that seem far, far away are actually very much in touch, in contact with folks who are quote-unquote free. But, there are a lot of costs associated with that. So it'd be everything from, I was a grad student when this whole thing started up. And grad students, we don't get paid a lot. And I quickly found, a third of my income going to doing things like sending care packages or getting the money together to take the train to go see him on a visit. Or just to keep the phone line on, right? Because if you don't know about this, it's very expensive to call from prison, although recent legislation has changed this. A couple of places have made it free to call from a prison. But there's a lot of these costs associated with it that can be very draining, very grueling, can really wear not only on the person that's getting the support, but also the person providing the support as well. So I joined, I think, my second year as a PhD student here at NYU, the prison education program, the research lab arm of it. It's this really amazing kind of one-of-a-kind program where once folks come outside, come to NYU, we train them on how to do research if they're interested, train them in what social science research on prisons can look like, and kind of advocacy through that lens. And it's just been an amazing experience. Right now, we're writing a book on debt in the prison systems, particularly the debt that families take on to support their loved ones. So like I said, it's incredibly expensive to support someone inside. You're nickel and dime for absolutely everything. We did a survey of about 500 people in New York State that were supporting someone inside. They spend about $8,000 a year just to support someone inside. And for wives or girlfriends, which predominantly the people providing support are women in these cases, right? Predominantly women of color from low income brackets, right? Predominantly, the average income was around $31,000 to $35,000. So imagine a third of your income being given away just to support someone inside, right? And I mean, you're charged for absolutely everything, from using a phone to, you have stamps for mail, but also now in a lot of prisons we have these free digital tablets, which are supposed to be kind of the latest and greatest thing to make prison life better, whatever that means, right? Meanwhile, you're charged 35 cents every time you want to send a message. You're upcharged on everything from music to movies that you can buy on this tablet. It's just, the whole thing is a racket, right? And the people that pay the cost for that are their loved ones, are their families. Not just the financial costs of it, but also the emotional costs as well. So at the research lab, what we're trying to do is understand all of those different costs, right? How are the financial costs tied into those emotional costs? How do people make decisions about how to provide the support, when to provide the support, right? And it's just been an amazing experience. I think for me, research and kind of school academics has always been a way that I've dealt with difficult things in my life, whether it's understanding, getting harassed by the cops or understanding, why my friend got locked up. It's just one way, another tool that we have to understand the world around us, hopefully change the world around us, which is kind of what led me to this work. And now this is pretty much what I'm set to do for the rest of my life, is understand kind of these communal and familial impacts of incarceration, and ultimately to change it, because I think that's probably why all of us are here.
A lot of you mentioned that the U.S. carceral system is tethered to the legacy of slavery and white supremacy. How does this legacy show up in practices, policies, and language of the carceral system today?
This is for everyone, so anyone who has thought.
All right. Well, if you want me to go first again. All right. So what I've learned is that our system, so slavery, right? Again, I'm going to give it from my perspective because I was not educated here in the United States of America, and I did not grow up here. Remember that. I grew up outside. So the fight and the challenges were new to me. This thing was going on while I was living here from 98 to 2009. That's when I was incarcerated. And I didn't really have a clue, right? And so what I learned was that slavery, which happened here, was taught to be abolished. But I figured out or was educated that it actually was not. And all that happened is that it was rebranded. Right? It was rebranded, and it operated in a different way. So they went from forcing people on private plantations and so on to do work to support individuals who owned and operated the business of slavery, to now a government-ran system where anyone who wanted to invest or who wanted in on it can get in on the action, and we will enslave our people around us, for money. Primarily, those who were of the marginalized community were targeted to be placed in this system. It's so all the prison system of the United States of America is a business of slavery, because you are enslaving people who the majority of them are not a danger or threat to society or many other people around them. All right, so anyone who misbehaves or has a bad behavior or might be desperate and does something in their desperation to try and put themselves in a better situation, breaks one of these multiple laws that you create that most of them don't know about sometimes. Our citizens run a system where we capture our citizens for making mistakes or behaving bad, and then we put them into this system by which the government and others make money off of these individuals being held in these prisons, which are warehouses and or dangerous new communities because of their size and what actually goes on in there. It's a whole new community. And it's a horrible thing when you understand what is actually going on. Their businesses created around prisons and around the justice system to support it in many different ways. And anyone who wants in, or most people who want in, can buy in by just supporting it. I think that it is prime. The reason why the prison system as it is flourishes is because that most folks in the United States of America have a culture and or a mindset of it's okay to punish and or enslave folks for whatever reason. If you don't like them or if they misbehave or whatever, it's okay for us to put them away and allow the system and others to make money on them, even if we don't. Even if we're not benefiting from it personally, it's okay to just allow the system to put them in. Because I want you guys to pay attention to something, right? There is no one running around putting a gun to individuals' heads or whipping them or shocking them or anything like that for them to make up lies and falsely and wrongfully incarcerate people and put them away in these prison systems, right? That stuff, that's not happening. There is no alien race or group that's controlling the minds of individuals and forcing them to incarcerate human beings and run this prison system, this horrible thing that's destroying people. And even today, where it's highlighted as much as it is that it's destroying folks and terrorizing folks, the majority of folks still sit peacefully by and think that it's okay, and that nothing is wrong with that. That is a programming, a mentality, a culture that the citizens of the United States of America have. And it's prevalent. You could look at the amount of prisons and folks in prisons compared to the rest of the world. You could look at it from multiple angles, and you would see that this is most likely the main cause and the main reason why what we got today is going on. And yeah, it's a horrible thing, and we definitely got to work on changing our mindset and our culture, the way that we do prisons. You do not have to enslave every person who misbehaves or who has a bad day or a bad night, who makes a mistake. We only do that because it's programmed. From slavery, we got so used to fighting and or dealing with slavery itself, and I think that somehow transformed into it's okay to do this to one another. It's okay to mistreat people. It's okay to not care about the sufferings and the destruction of people, and that's how we live. And until we focus on that mindset, that behavior, that culture, and really start pushing back and not just talking about it, but actually doing something physical to make that change, I think we're going to be there for a while. But hopefully the Remedy Project could spark the change that we need, the final change that we need to get people to act. That's what we want. We don't want to talk about it anymore. We want to do the things, physical things that need to be done to bring about change, to bring about healing, and to bring about a new direction in the United States of America.
Okay. So we've talked a few about like
Can I say
tactics of.
something about
Oh
that?
yes, please.
The only thing I would add is that slavery is a labor system fundamentally. It's a form of forced labor. It's also an ownership system if we're talking about chattel slavery. But chattel slavery is not the only kind of slavery. It's the one we're most familiar with in the history of the U.S., however, but there are many related kinds of slavery. And when people, and convict leasing in the South is also a system historically that many people point to, and is being defined as a system that's worse than slavery in many ways. And it's actually the Southern system of convict leasing that I think dominates the public mind or public consciousness about that practice. Those imageries of the guard riding shotgun on horseback with the big hat, and prisoners in striped clothes with shaven heads and shackles, laboring under that sun, that very harsh southern sun. And that's an image of southern backwardness. But actually, all of those components of that picture were pioneered here in New York State, in the North. And under the private contract labor system, which was prevalent in New York State prisons from the early 19th century onwards. And it was so prevalent, it was known as a Yankee invention. In fact, the pioneers of convict leasing in the South referred to it as a Yankee invention, and saw that the postbellum South was a very propitious environment for introducing a new version of that. And so that's a very important history to know about in our own state, and it sort of undercuts this idea that, we're in the North, slavery never really took hold here, even though New York City was full of slavery, full of enslaved people. But the prison system in New York State was the most advanced form of forced labor for private profit in the 19th century. And the first great act of abolition in the prison system was also here in the 1890s, when the private contract labor system was abolished, largely because of the campaigning of the labor movement. Labor movement cut its teeth in the 19th century in opposition to free, to unpaid prison labor. And there's always an NYU tie-in to stories like this, and I'll just mention it. NYU's first building on the northeast corner of Washington Square, this sort of Gothic pile, and the only remnant of which is a little pillar of it that is in Schwartz Plaza. If you've often wondered what that was. It was demolished, but that building was actually constructed with convict labor from Sing Sing prison. The limestone that was quarried from Sing Sing prison and was dressed there was used to construct that building. The stonecutters in New York rebelled against this. The Union of Stonecutters, and the series of riots that were quite famous in the 1930s, 1940s. There's always an NYU tie-in to these stories. So that history obviously is a very important one. The history of forced labor is, and the actual the instrument of forced labor in prisons is the primary form of discipline, the key form of discipline.
Thank you. If you don't mind, I just want to ask a quick follow-up to Professor Ross. Your book, you interview a lot of people who have experienced prison slavery. Could you just briefly describe what it looks like today to be going through forced labor in prisons?
Well, there's no right to refuse, and the right to refuse is the key to any effort to reform that system. Unless you have the right to refuse unpaid or unsafe labor, then you're essentially not free under any definition of the term. So we did a lot of interviews with people about their inability to refuse labor. We did interviews not just in New York State, but also in southern states, Texas and Alabama and Georgia, where labor is entirely unpaid. New York State, you can get paid from 12 cents an hour to I mean, the top rate is 65 cents an hour for an industry job. But in the southern states, there's no payment whatsoever, and that's the reason we went there. And let me give you one example of why it's so important. Some of you may have noticed that this year there was a wildcat strike in the Park Correctional Officers in New York State, and National Guardsmen had to be brought into the prisons all across the state. They're still in the prisons, in a lot of the prisons. In Wallkill, we still have National Guardsmen in there. And the reasons for this strike were multifarious. Some of them had to do with pay, some had to do with conditions, but the really key one was that the governor took away solitary confinement and temporarily eliminated the threat of solitary confinement. And correctional officers are not happy about this at all. And I mean, this is my version, but they concocted a lot of evidence that in the months following the abolition of solitary confinement, the number of attacks on officers increased, multifold. I think you have to take those statistics with a pinch of salt, quite frankly. But they were very persuasive to rank and file guards all across the state, and they went out on strike. And the first thing they got, the first concession they got from Governor Hochul was to reestablish solitary confinement as a punishment for, a number of infractions, but primarily it is used to back up the imposition of forced labor in prisons, and we found that to be pretty key and pretty central to a lot of our interviews.
Can I add to that? All right. So there's two. I'll give two other perspectives that are equally important and that are equally true to what the professor said. The special housing unit and or SHUs in the prison system is used by the prison staff as a way to control and or manipulate the behavior of the prison system's, let's say, majority population who are weak and or afraid of ending up in the SHU for any long period of time, because it has been a horrible place for a long time that you want to go. They make this area very uncomfortable and very harsh to live in, and people know about it. When you come to prison, you hear, or you don't. The SHU is the big bad scary place. So a lot of folks who've never experienced it don't actually want to, and so prison officers know this and understand this and know that all they have to do is threaten an individual with the SHU, with SHU time, and or place them in the SHU for a little bit of time, and they could force them to do a lot of things that they want to get them to do by doing that. And what was happening with the taking away of the ability to place these folks in the SHU, what you were doing was taking away a lot of power of the forced manipulation and control of the prison population from the prison officers, and they didn't like that, because if an individual cursed you out or said something bad to you, which incarcerated folks normally would do because they're always frustrated, the prison officer now would have no way to push back. Right, the SHU is the way to do that. Oh, you wanna be smart? You wanna mouth off to me? Okay, I'll put you in the SHU. I'll lie or write a false report, and you'll end up in the SHU, and that will teach you a lesson, right? And they were about to lose that, and so that was big. That was huge, right? And so that was one thing pertaining to that. And I'm going to address the slavery in the sense of slave labor. Yes, that is accurate and true, and it's a big deal. But there is the other part which is not normally acknowledged and or recognized, which is the warehousing of individuals, right? There is money or business behind that. Even if I'm not forcing that individual to work, the mere fact that I am putting this individual in a warehouse for years and then charging the taxpayers, right, money to hold these individuals in that space for this amount of years, and then I'm paying my workers, I'm paying other businesses and organizations to provide food to and other things to run this system and manage the system. Here it is, we are making money and enriching ourselves. We have good jobs and good careers off the back of enslaving citizens who might have made a mistake or done something wrong, and so on and so forth. Some of them do commit crimes. Yes, I agree, but it's my perspective that unless you are a threat to an individual specifically and or a danger to society in the sense that people have to be worried about their lives and their physical safety if you are outside, I don't think that there is enough to justify enslaving the amount of people and housing the amount of people that we do in these systems and destroying their lives and their family lives and so on and so forth.
Thank you. I kind of wanted to circle back to a topic we discussed in your introductions a decent amount, which was the way that the prison system is not an isolated or closed system. It has effects far beyond the walls of the prison. So in your experiences and expertise, what are some ways in which prisons actually shape society beyond their walls, whether it's on a family level, community level, even economic level when it comes to defining labor on the outside? So, for everybody.
I can go. There's kind of two main costs, I put it, that families and communities pay when their loved ones are locked up. First are the kind of emotional or relational costs, right? It just sucks to have someone you love locked up and under the control of the state for however many years, right? And by maintaining that connection and having some contact with the prison, which is not a great institution to be in contact with in any degree, whether you're held captive by it or you're someone on the outside, it's just not a fun experience to have. That weighs on you, that weighs on your relationship, right? Imagine your entire relationship with your loved one being filtered through prison surveillance systems or through a visit floor or things like that, right? So there's deep emotional costs to supporting someone, to just even having someone you love inside, right? And that's the first way we can kind of see that punishment doesn't just end at the prison walls, right? In many ways, it needs to go beyond the walls of the prison to actually function how it wants to function, right? And the second of those are financial, which I mentioned briefly already, around $8,000 a year just to support someone inside. And with that kind of financial cost, it's not just money that's being lost and that's flowing in and out of a prison, right? It's loss of time. People sacrifice going to college. People sacrifice having families because their loved ones are locked up. It's loss of opportunities. You have to miss out on saving for vacation because you have to save for sending for packages every month or something like that. So these financial, these emotional costs are really tied into how people can go about living their daily life. And if you take nothing else away from what I say today, just know that punishment never ends at the prison walls. It needs to go beyond that end, precisely because people on the outside experience things like having all of their paycheck go into funding someone's life in prison, or having to sacrifice things that they love or want in order to keep up support. I think that's just testament to the fact that prisons are connected to society. They are not, again, someplace just far away where we throw people we don't like, right? They're fundamentally connected to society. They circulate capital. They circulate people, right? And finding those routes of circulation, how people and resources move throughout prisons, I think is one of the most important things to being able to take them apart, right? Because we as a society out here still depend on prisons, even though, again, they seem so far away with all the bad people we don't like. Our sense of freedom is still dependent on someone else's unfreedom, right? So from that perspective, we can see that, okay, this is not two separate worlds. We're all living in one world. And those of us out here that have a little bit more resources, a little bit more freedom, a little more leeway, need to figure out ways to figure out how all that stuff is circulating and interrupt that, which I think is how we actually end up taking apart this prison system that, again, doesn't just control people inside, but controls and shapes people on the outside as well.
Maybe I could add a couple of things to what Jacob said. We talked about labor inside the prisons, behind the walls, but the criminal justice system is a massive employer in and of itself. Not just correctional officers, but everyone involved in security and policing and the judicial system and so on and so forth. If you think about, in addition, if you think about the incarcerated population, taking 2 million people out of the employment market, out of the formal employment market, has a huge impact on the job market. Taking 2 million people out of the housing market also has a considerable impact. These are all major sociological factors. And I would add, and this is really something that came out of our research, and I want to touch on David's use of the term warehousing. Warehousing is a theory that's kind of popular theory to explain mass incarceration in this country, that after deindustrialization, all the industrial jobs were taken elsewhere. That left a dispensable surplus labor pool, especially in inner cities, source of social subversion, and it was that labor pool that had to be somehow quarantined off and incarcerated and warehoused in prisons. That's one of the more favored explanations for the rise of mass incarceration. So that incarcerated population, according to that theory, is sequestered and quarantined away from the formal economy. We didn't find that to be the case in our research. We found there was a lot of continuity between the free world economy and the economy behind the bars. Why? Largely because there's a very thriving informal economy in prisons. A lot of the work expended doesn't really happen so much in formal job placements, but in hustling. Everyone has to have a hustle to survive behind the walls. Unless you have a lot of money coming from your family or your friends on the outside, you're not going to make it. Everyone has to find a hustle, and that hustle takes multifarious forms. And people actually expend more energy and work, we defined it as work, in the informal economy, on the hustle. And what that means is, just to summarize, the economy inside the prison is a lousy wage and a hustle. And in many ways, it's no different from what we have in our neoliberal economy on the outside. These are the precarceral conditions that lead to incarceration in the first place. A lot of folks cannot earn a living wage, and they have to do something on the side. And if that something on the side violates the law, they're going to end up behind bars. And exactly the same formula applies while they're in prison, and then when they get out of prison, it's even more difficult to find a job because you have the mark of felony, you have the mark, your carceral mark against you. Finding a job at a living wage is so very, very difficult, and so a lot of folks go back to the hustle, which they have to do to stay alive, and they get recaptured by the system. So we found a lot of continuity there, and that the prison itself is not sequestered, it's not quarantined. It's a very vibrant and exemplary part of the neoliberal economy, which generates so much poverty for so many people.
Yeah, I wanted to have one more point about, I think, the perspective that I often think about, the way in which society interacts with prison, and the way what happens in prison leaks out, is thinking about violence and thinking about safety and violence. And I think that there's another cultural aspect to why we have such a massive prison system and prison culture in this country, and that's like there's a real culture in the United States of fear of one another. There's this sense that's really manifested in our media, and manifested everywhere, that other people could victimize you at any point, right? Like that people around you are violent or could be violent, could be scary. Like the streets are unsafe, our cities are unsafe, right? Like these are narratives that are very present and have been present throughout much of American history. That the country is unsafe. And I think just kind of psychologically, sociologically speaking, there are very, very, very few people that I think are born into this world wanting to hurt other people. I think that is just not, I fundamentally believe that is just not a real prevalent part of human nature. And a very common abolitionist line that I think about a lot in my work is that the grand majority of people who are perpetrators of violence were once victims of violence, right? It's like harm perpetuates harm. And you are not going to commit a violent act against someone else unless you yourself have been a victim of violence. And what the prison system does is just creates every year hundreds of thousands of victims of violence, and not just victims of interpersonal violence. I mean, I think there's popular in the culture a sense of prisoners attack each other and are getting in fights, they shank each other, whatever, that kind of vibe. But it's really institutionalized of violence, just the act of every single person when they enter prison has to strip naked and spread their ass cheeks for a stranger, right? That is violent. And the being assigned a number, you're not called your name, you're called inmate, or you're called a number. That's violent. And that's violence. Violence is inflicted on you by the state, which is something that theoretically is supposed to be something that's supposed to protect you and supposed to be something you trust. So you are hundreds of thousands of people every year are going through this system where they're experiencing not only violence but state violence. So then, and the grand majority of people who go to prison come out. Most people don't have life sentences. So whether it's a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, you're coming back, integrating back into the world with a sense of much less trust in the institutions that are theoretically supposed to support you, much less trust of the people around you, fear, and violent. A lot of people have to become violent in prison in order to protect themselves and have those instincts bred into them while they're there. And then that creates the very people that are, that you hear in the news are scary people in the subway and people who are committing violence, and people that you should be afraid of, and the reason that you should want more cops in your neighborhood, right? It's creating, reproducing a culture and reproducing violent people who then get right back, warehoused back in, right? Who are, because I'm on an economic standpoint, these people who have been, even if you're an incredibly robust person who is not impacted by this violence, it's really hard for you to come out into the world. You can't find a job, you can't find a place to live, you can't, there are lots of other reasons that are going to make it very difficult for you to stay out, let alone the fact that you've just been tortured for several years, many, many years of your life. And it actually creates this sense of, it creates unsafety for all of us. And the very thing that's supposed to be our bulwark against unsafety, the thing that's supposed to be we send people to prisons that our streets will be more safe, it's actually the very thing that's creating the actual unsafety that we have, I think.
That's top-notch work right there, folks.
How would you say more accessible mass media has either harmed or benefited, criminal justice in general? And do you think certain forms of media or news promote criminal justice in a certain way?
I could start there. I think that it works in both ways. There's some good to it and some bad to it. I like to focus a lot on the good that some media has done. Right, one of the things about media these days, because we are able to record stuff ourselves, and show these different recordings. Like you now get to show people that the fear and the accusations that minorities and or folks of a brown skin or dark skin have been complaining about for generations is actually true, was actually happening, and still happens today, right? So folks been complaining a long time about the hurt and the pain that police take advantage of them, and that prison officers take advantage and or beat people and kill people and these different things. And it was always, that's nonsense, that it would never happen, and so on and so forth. But now cameras and the media has been able to show the masses that these things are actually true. They are not unicorns. These are real things, real events, and this stuff really happens, right? You had an entire prison closed down because of a rape culture and or an abusive culture towards women. And I promise you, it just doesn't happen to them. It happens in male prisons also, right? But you're seeing these things in real time. You're understanding that this pain and this hurt, this crisis that is the prison system of the United States is real, and it's a real problem. And I think media has done, a great job in exposing and making that prevalent today, which is one of the reasons why I am here with you guys. Because if it wasn't for that media, if it wasn't for that, you guys who are genuine and uncorrupted by the system, seeing these things and getting a sense of it and understanding that the false narrative that the justice system is good and just, you don't have that. You're seeing things in real timing, and you have a real sense that, okay, this stuff is not true. There's actually bad going on here, and this is why you guys are passionate about that, and this is why I am in lockstep with you guys in the fight to make a difference. And I think that that's because of the media, what the media has been able to do. Granted, there is a bad side to it, and I will probably let Anna give you a dose of that.
Yeah, I think what I would say, to build on your point, is that the mainstream media in this country has every incentive to reinforce the social, political, cultural, economic status quo, which means defending the idea of like crime and punishment and the fact that the country's unsafe and that prisoners are bad people and that like all of the things that are narratives that I'm sure all of you are familiar with, and you're familiar with those like for a reason, right? The mainstream media narrative is not what David's talking about. And I think the one thing that I would add is any piece of media that you have seen to the contrary, which you, if you're in this room, you probably have seen, is I can say with almost 100% confidence, is connected or a direct result of social movements and of activism. And that's like the only reason why an alternative narrative is in our mass media at all. And it's not like the New York Times is deciding to say something different from what is like the social, political, cultural status quo. It's like there are movement actors behind those narratives changing and those like media, like alternative media being presented to you. And I think it's really important to keep that in mind that like those people fought to have those narratives put forward, and we need people to be continuing to fight to present those alternative narratives.
It's not easy to get hold of media technology behind the wall, but it is possible. And because cell phones in particular are contraband, you're not supposed to have cell phones in prisons. It's actually one of the reasons why there's a big shortage of correctional officers right now, is because young people don't want to take a job where they can't have a cell phone for 8 hours or 12 hours for that matter. Seriously. But there are there are states, and Alabama was one of the reasons we went to Alabama to do our research was because of the prisoner strikes. The prisoner strike wave from 2014 to 2020, series of strikes that originated with the Free Alabama movement of prisoners in that state. One of the key components of organizing those strikes, and they spread across the country, was access to cell phones and communication through cell phones. And once the strikes were underway, the ability to broadcast images and footage from inside the prison, vividly depicting the conditions and the brutality of the guards and so on and so forth. So that was a very interesting, and that would not have been possible. That level of organization would not have been possible without access to that media technology. It's expensive. So it costs you $1,000 to get hold of a cell phone inside a prison, but there are ways of getting hold of it. And so that's another angle. It's not mass media, but it's an angle on guerrilla media, subversive media on the inside.
All right, I have kind of a bigger one here. I'm excited to see you guys answer it. It's can a system built on retribution and control ever truly be reformed, or is abolition the only path towards justice? If so, how do you conceive of that abolition?
If you want me to go first again, I'll do that. Because I have a simple understanding, and that is it boils right back down to the culture and the mindset that the American society has, the United States of America have, that stems again from slavery, right? We have struggled and fought and seen the destruction that happened to folks who were brought from African lands over to this side and forced to do this labor and destroyed and treated horribly. And and for many years, when we taught slavery or we say slave, when you hear the word slave for many years, you don't think the actual meaning of slave, which is anyone, a human being who is held against their will and forced to do work for free, right? I think that's the kind of flatline base level understanding of what a true slave is. No, when you hear that, most people, if you really think about it, when you've been hearing slave and somebody says, oh, it's the slave or slave, it's a slave movie, what you hear and what goes through your mind is, oh, it must be a movie where black and brown people are being taken advantage of or being forced to work and so on and so forth, right? Where the minorities of our communities are taken advantage of and are forced to work and so on. And in the movies, for a long time, when a movie was done and they had to depict slaves, right, they would make sure that what you see was a brown, black, and or minority individual in the movie being depicted as slaves, right? You would rarely, if ever, see movies where Caucasian folks were portrayed as slaves. I don't know if there's any today. I have not seen any yet myself, but that is not the norm, right? And so because of that, because we are taught from birth the last couple 10 centuries that slaves look a certain way, act a certain way, song a certain way, and that it's okay to take advantage of these people and do things to them, force them to work and or warehouse them and so on and so forth for the rest of society to benefit. and to prosper, kind of got comfortable with that, and now it's our norm. It's okay. It's not a big deal, and I do not see real abolition and or true abolition happening until that culture and or mindset is really pushed back against. That a person, anyone who is held against their will and forced to work is a slave. A slave is not automatically an individual who has a darker shade of skin or is an Asian or from a South American nation or African nation and so on. That's not what a slave is. A slave is anyone who is forced to work against their will. Once we take slavery back to that the understanding of what a slave is back to that, and then we work towards purging ourselves of incarcerating and warehousing one another because we don't like one another, because individuals are misbehaving or have mental issues and all these things. Once we start moving away from that culture, we could see true abolition. But we need to come up with alternatives, and not just come up with them, not just talk about them. We need to start implementing them. We need to start creating a new way to hold folks accountable who need to be held accountable, who are not an immediate threat or danger to any other physical human being, right? If we do that and we, find other ways to punish other crimes and or help folks who are suffering mentally with behavioral problems and all these issues, if we take and focus on these things, humanity, right? I think along with the changing of the mind, I think we can get to abolition and or real change in the United States of America at a quicker and faster pace. Until then, we're just gonna keep dragging our feet on this issue and back and forth, and students of the Remedy Project are gonna be here to fight for the humanity until we figure it out.
My answer to the question is abolition. I think actually thinking about this is something that I think a line that I heard attending a panel like this when I was in college, which is that prison itself is a reform, right? Like the prison was a reform on a more violent form of punishment, and we see where that's gotten us. I think total abolition is really the only path to healing our country, transforming the way that we do justice, and rectifying all of the problems that we've been talking about for the last hour and a half. But I see abolition as a world building movement. And what it takes is building back all of the institutions that have been stripped away while our prisons have been built up. So that's public education, that's access to full medical care, medical services, that's access to housing, access to employment, access to like every person should have access to all of the things that they need. And if we have that, we won't have crime. We won't have a need for prison. And I think that also is like a very expansive view of abolition too, where like if you are going to pursue a career in public education and fighting for the preserving and expanding public education in this country, like that's an abolitionist pursuit. If you want to fight for free like Medicare for all, healthcare for all of us, that's an abolitionist pursuit. Like creating a world where we have everything that we need is a world where we don't need prison. And that's how I think about abolition.
I totally agree with what Anna just said. I think it was a very articulate way of putting it. There are many ways of being an abolitionist, of course, and I'm always wary of people who set themselves up as arbiters of abolition and say, well, that's just a reformist. What we really need is abolition. and that's a very effective put down in certain circumstances. Um, we encountered some of this with our book because the 13 Forward Coalition that we're part of is, pushing for prevailing wage to be paid within the system, and OSHA, safety requirements on the job to be observed, and benefits, Social Security, and so on and so forth. And some people push back and say, well, all you're doing is feeding the system. All you're doing is pumping more money into the system, and we should be dismantling the system. And I think it's a valid point, but it only goes so far, because if you abolish slavery without exception and you take away the ability to punish through forced labor, and you start obliging states to pay prevailing wages, they're going to start shrinking the incarcerated population big time. There's no question about it. And in many ways, I guess the framework for our thinking about this is really to go back to W.E.B. Du Bois when he talks about abolition democracy. That formal abolition or emancipation, let's say historically, puts you down on the freedom road, but the road is not built yet. You have to build that road. You have to completely reform institutions to make that possible. You have to make the road as you go along. Sometimes yourself, but if you have enough allies, then you can build something bigger. So the actual formal act of abolition is necessary but not sufficient. And you have to do a lot more work to make sure that you get to the freedom destinations on that road. That was our framework for thinking about this. And so we were able to argue that abolishing slavery without exception is that first act. It's not sufficient. It's just the first act. And you have to do a lot more work to get to where you want to be, dismantling the system entirely.
I just have one thought on this. The best way I've heard abolition described is by one of my mentors, Ruth Wilson Gilmore. She says abolition is life in rehearsal, which I've always just loved that phrasing, because abolition isn't just some far off goal that we're going to know when we get there type of deal. It's something we have to do every day. It's a practice. It's recognizing we live in a very punitive culture, especially here in the US, and doing the mental work, the interpersonal work to undo that punitive mindset, right? So it's a way of living. It's a way that we're living right now. It's a way that's being practiced right now. And so I always found that framing helpful for me in approaching this work, is that we're not trying to get to some far off destination. In many ways, we're already at where we need to be. It's just a matter of putting the resources and the energy to work to make that happen.
I think, Jacob, you kind of wrapped it up very well, and I think it touches on my last point and last question. Everyone here is really interested in criminal justice reform, and they want to be here to learn. What can we do as students?
Join an organization. That's the most important thing you can do. And not just any organization. Join an organization that has some material investment. Remedy Project. That has material investment in the lives of incarcerated people. Too often, a lot of these orgs treat prisons, incarcerated folks as some far off, abstract thing that you can just fetishize and feel good about yourself with. No, you need to actually be involved with folks' lives. Write letters to folks. Put money on people's books. Do something to be involved in people's lives, right? Some people do not have anyone to talk to. If you just write a letter, it can be the start of a relationship that builds up to something, that builds a program like this or something, right? Join an organization, be involved. You have to work with other people. Go outside your house. Don't just do Zoom. Go out and work with other people to make this stuff happen, because that's what actually is going to change things when people get in the same room together. So join something, please.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because it's true. The students at the Remedy Project get to really and truly push back against the mindset and the culture of punishment and of destruction that's happening within the prison system. That needs to change in order for us to truly heal as a nation, right? The destruction of human beings in prison and their family members on the outside, this needs to stop in order for us to heal, in order for us to have well-rounded human beings coming back into our societies. And if you guys join organizations like the Remedy Project, and also I would also say the Innocence, one of my personal favorites is the Innocence Project, right? Is fighting for folks who are in prison wrongfully or falsely. I love that organization and what they do. Getting involved in that active fight, which makes a real change in individuals' lives in a real timely manner, is highly important. The Remedy Project needs you guys. As many of you that joins the organization, you send a message across the prison system that changes the mindset and you become the hope of folks who are incarcerated. They get to understand that the culture is changing, that people actually care, that people actually want to see the prison system change. They start no longer feeling hopeless, no longer feeling suicidal. You don't necessarily have to write them personal letters. You can if you want to, but you don't even have to do that, because just the mere fact that you're putting in the real time and the real work to make their lives better takes them way far beyond anything that they would ever have dreamed of. The Remedy Project is the hope of folks who are incarcerated, and it is the place for real action and real time work amongst students. And it's great work. I love doing it. I love working with you guys. You're so honest, sincere, and passionate about what you do. And yeah, it's giddy. We get messages from folks on the inside all the time on how awesome and how great it is to have such an organization and such things going on. And all we need to take it to the next level. There's two things we need to take this to the next level, to have a ripple effect across the nation immediately when it comes to change in the prison system. Is if the Remedy Project gets good funding, where we could get more staff members on board to help manage the system and the students, because it is a massive operation. It takes a lot of work. For those of you who have been involved, you know it and you've seen it, right? And the second, so the money is important, right? And the second thing that I think we need is the recognition. I like to say we need the beehive status or the Swifty status, right? Where you guys come together and join all other student networks and organizations across this country, and you all come together. And so when a student writes a remedy and says this person has not received dental care in over 10 years and their teeth is falling out, and you need to do something about this right away, and we put that up as a campaign, and then 100,000 students across America go on our website and click on that campaign and send that message to the folks who are involved and who are in charge. Boy, I tell you, heads will roll and things will move so fast. That is the type, that's where I see us going. That's where I hope this organization can get to. You guys have not let me down yet so far. I came out of prison, experienced something and had an idea. And even though the students saw it as something that was piecing together, I had already mapped and understood the vision and what it is. And you guys have created that and having it running and functioning perfectly. And I think we could get to it's just a matter of time before you guys get us to the Swifties and or the Beehive status across the nation with students. You're going to be unstoppable because one thing is for certain: you are always going to be right on this one, which is the prison system is horrible. It's a crisis, and it needs to be abolished.
Add one more quick thing. You said obviously join the Remedy Project. That's our organization. You should join, and we designed it to be a movement of young people. Like it's an organization that it's very easy for any person to get involved in. Anything you're passionate about, you're good at. They will find a place for you within the organization. Talk to Dimitri, Kit, Ayin. There's a chapter at NYU that's designed to get you guys involved in this work. But also, I really believe that you just should join any organization if you care about this kind of work. And I remember getting that advice a lot when I kind of was first dipping my toes in the social movement world, and I would leave being like, I have to join an organization, and then I just wouldn't know what to do. Wouldn't know where to look. I didn't know where to find an organization, and so I am offering myself up as a resource, and I'm sure these two would too. If you are any of you are I want to join an organization that does XYZ, come talk to me, come talk to one of them, and we'll try to find an organization that aligns with what you care about. And I'm not going to be offended if you don't want to join the Remedy Project. I really want, we were saying, abolition is a big tent, and we need we need people who are passionate about this stuff to be dedicating their time and their energy to transforming the world, and I know a lot of organizations, and I'm sure these folks do too. So come talk to us, and we'll connect you to things that can get you involved.
I can't end without saying a few words about carcerality on this campus and the consciousness about carcerality on our campuses, because what gets innovated in prison doesn't stay there. It gets projected beyond the prison walls and into society. Carcerality at large is the term we use to describe this. And over the last 19 months or so, we've seen our campuses being transformed into heavily patrolled citadels with walled-off common spaces, advanced surveillance systems, uniformed security personnel in every corner, and a lot of draconian punishment and discipline for students speaking out their voice of conscience without a lot of due process. And these are all techniques of surveillance and punishment that are incubated within the carceral system, and they find their way into our institutions. And we're seeing that now. We've seen that now over the last 19 months or so, and you're conscious of it. Encourage you to speak up about it and do something about it. Securitization usually doesn't get ratcheted down. There aren't that many instances of desecuritization, but that's what we need on our campuses. And I say that even as at a time when the full force of the state, the full power of the state is being directed against liberal education on campuses like this, and task forces are being sent on witch hunts onto our campus, and there'll be one coming to NYU pretty soon. Study it, document it, and speak out about it, because it's very, very important.
Thank you all so much for coming. Please give them And thank you all to the Amnesty International students. This event wouldn't have been possible if you guys didn't show interest in criminal justice and criminal justice reform. Join Amnesty International, join the Remedy Project, talk to them, and have a good evening. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.